This is Surviving as a Civilian. I am your host, Scott. With the help of my friend Andrew, we created this podcast to share success stories of combat veterans and how they overcame the challenges of returning back to civilian life. These are actual stories told by actual veterans. Content warning, this podcast talks about war, and some of the stories in this podcast contain graphic events of violence and may contain explicit language. Listener discretion is advised. Additionally, these veterans are telling their story of how they recall the events. Some of the details may have changed over time. Welcome to Surviving as a Civilian, Episode 11, the AAR for Will McKinney. I'm Scott, here with my friend Andrew.
Hey, Scott. Glad to be back.
Yes, so this week we're going to take a look at what we thought about Will's episode, then introduce next week's episode, and which will be the last full interview. So, Andrew, for Will's episode, what are some of the things that you liked about it?
I never heard his story from him directly before. I heard it in country from my platoon sergeant the day it happened, but I never heard the actual story, and it was way more intense than I thought. And it had me pacing back and forth the first couple of times I listened to it. It was pretty intense.
Yeah, Andrew, it was a difficult thing for me to record. So as I was recording it and listening to it, I the original took a lot longer, but I was there in my head just picturing it all. And he describes everything so good that like it's easy to get an idea, what the environment was. Not obviously not the pain and everything, but what was going through his mind. And again, for me, like he was one of my guys when this happened. I happened to be in a different spot when this went on. So to hear that for the first time exactly like that was a bit of an event for me.
Yeah, I'm going to jump a little forward for this one, but since you already talked about it, that's what I thought was real unique about his episode 2 was he did such a great job of telling that story. I could actually picture for one, I was already in country, so I probably have a better way to picture it, but I could picture everything he said almost perfectly. So it was really good the way he told that story. And we said it over and over again about some of these people that we interviewed. The one thing I really liked about it was that he chose to deploy over going to Special Forces training. And I remember telling him, I was like, you should go to Special Forces training. So, but he chose not to and chose to deploy, which takes a lot of courage to do.
Yeah, Andrew, I agree with you. I had the same conversation with him before we deployed, and he was a phenomenal team leader. I couldn't ask really for that whole squad just clicked like you wouldn't believe. But I told him, I said, hey, man, you might want to do this. You're going to get plenty of deployments when you get to SF, when you finally pass everything. And he knew that. He'd already been deployed to Iraq before. And so he told me it's not about the deployments, it's about the guys. That's what he really cared about. That his guys that he's been training up with, he didn't want them to go over without him there. He just felt like absolutely part of the brotherhood and the team and everything.
Yeah, it's we said it for Franklin too. It takes a lot of courage, and it is a brotherhood. You do grow a bond with people, especially people that you're training, that you want to make sure they succeed in what you trained them on. It's almost like a reflection of yourself training people.
What else did you like about the episode, Andrew?
I liked when you asked him if he would do it again, and I obviously couldn't see him, but I could picture just like the gears turning in his head as he thought about it, and then it was pretty cool to hear or see him go through that and replay everything and then at the end of it still be like, yeah, I would do it again. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, you're right, Andrew. It's just a testament of what kind of person that Will is to even though whatever happened to him, he would still be willing to go back. And I often, the task force that he was assigned to, that squad took care of that infantry battalion. Especially the one company they were attached to. I wonder how many lives before the incident he saved, prior to what happened.
Yeah, I think that's a good way for combat engineers to look at what they do as a positive, because it is real nerve-wracking to find and dig up explosives. So it's a good way to validate you putting your life on the line, is you could be saving multiple lives and other soldiers. I agreed with when he said, looking back at it, he's like, it was crazy. He's like, at the time I wasn't scared, but looking back on it, he was like, what was I thinking? I walked around and was looking for bombs, you know?
Right. Yeah, I agree too. And you know, as well as I do, sometimes when you're over in that kind of situation and day after day you're kind of doing one of the most dangerous things you could possibly do, you kind of get numb to it after a while. And I don't know if you, and then, you know, the senior leaders always used to talk about don't get complacent, and it's kind of just a catchphrase that the Army uses, but honestly, you get complacent real fast and it's impossible not to. I mean, you have to constantly do stuff. And then unfortunately this happened to Will at a point where I think everybody who may have been complacent before definitely was not after that.
Yeah, well, a year-long deployment is pretty long, and you do get complacent, especially when you're walking the same places over and over again. And sadly, sometimes it does take an injury to really send that thing back home again. But the thing that I thought that will help with Will's interview for other people is just his overall attitude is awesome. And the fact that he went through all that, came out positive, and then turned his attention to a very difficult schooling and a very difficult career at a very difficult college. And he stayed positive through the whole thing. And he just has a really great attitude about life. And I think that's a good thing to share with other people.
Yeah, I agree, Andrew. It's just his attitude and demeanor. I mean, I'm sure he had some down days or whatever, or down time, but for him to pull himself out and then force himself, he could have done something else. He could have actually sat on his ass the rest of his life and collected disability and bitched about how the Army screwed him over or whatever, but he didn't. He took on one of the hardest things he could have, the Colorado School of Mines. You know, you heard in his story about the other students, hurting themselves over this course or the school. He didn't have to do all that, but again, it just goes to show you what kind of example he is still once he's out to the guys that he was around or served with or is listening to the podcast.
Yeah, I thought it's. I think that's the biggest takeaway from this is just try difficult stuff, put your mind to it, and have a good attitude. And like he said, like nothing good is not worth working for. So work for everything, try hard stuff, get it done, and push through, and have a good attitude about it.
Andrew, what do you think? How do you think Will's story will help people?
Well, his attitude was great, and I think the good thing that he took time to bring up towards the end of the interview was how tough it is for soldiers and veterans and first responders and to having to deal with a lot of the stuff they saw. And I like that he brought up about that suicide awareness, which falls under our mission. And that's part of what we want to do here. We want to show great stories of soldiers and bring attention to some of these issues that can be prevented.
Right, I agree, Andrew. That was a pretty solid point. And it's something we've been talking about as far as this podcast or this project we've been working on is not just the military. It's just not the vets that are going through this stuff. A lot of people are. And for Will to include that and understand really what we're trying to do helped out the cause a lot.
Yeah. Overall, I think it was one of our best interviews, and man, every time I listen to it, it stirs up some emotions in me. It's a real intense interview, and I'm glad that he took the time to share it with us and share it with everyone, because it couldn't have been easy. When you're actually doing the interview, you almost like relive it in your head. So it couldn't have been easy for him to do it too. So I'm really glad that all the veterans took their time to share their stories with us. But Other than that, I'm good, Scott. So talk to you soon.
All right, Andrew, thank you for joining me this week. Next week for our episode, we have our last real interview, Chris Compagnone. Now, it's going to be labeled Chris Comp because neither myself or Andrew can spell Compagnone. But next Friday, Chris Compagnone will come out. Thank you for listening. Before I go, on behalf of Andrew and I, we would like to say thank you to all the veterans we talked to for taking the time to share their stories with us. We created this podcast to show not just the military, but everyone, that you can make it through some of the toughest times in your life and come out on the other side on top. Here at Surviving as a Civilian, we cannot stress enough the importance of getting help if needed or giving help if you can. Sometimes it could be as simple as making a phone call or answering that phone in the middle of the night from someone you haven't heard from in a while. If you or someone you know is struggling, help is available at the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255 or text the word HOME to 741-741. As always, I would like to thank Andrew Calls for his contributions and hard work behind the scenes. Without him, this podcast would not exist. Additionally, a special thank you to William Andrew Hall for his work on the logo and cover photo. If you like William's work, his contact information is provided on our social media. If you are a veteran and would like to share your story with us on the podcast, email us at survivingasacivilian.casting@gmail.com. Subscribe and rate this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or anywhere else you get your podcast. Like and follow Surviving as a Civilian on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just as it sounds, except for add the underscore between the words for Twitter.